My name is Katie Shawn. I'm 34 years old. I live in Florida. And on a Tuesday evening in March, sitting alone in a Dollar General parking lot eating a gas station sandwich, because that's what my budget allowed, I looked down at a lottery ticket I almost didn't buy, and I saw 6 numbers that would change everything. But here's what nobody tells you about winning $5.3 million. The hardest part isn't managing the money. The hardest part is staying silent long enough to find out who in your life actually loves you, and who only ever loved what you could give them. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how I kept the biggest secret of my life for almost 8 months, how I went back to my family, broken, asking for help, just to see who would show up, and how one by one, every single person I trusted looked me dead in the eyes and walked away. This isn't a story about money. This is a story about loyalty, about the quiet kind of betrayal that doesn't come with screaming or slamming doors. It comes with excuses, with soft voices, with "I'm so sorry, Katie, it's just not a good time." Stay with me, because by the time this story is over, you are going to understand something that took me 34 years and $5 million to learn. The people who underestimate you are the ones writing your blueprint for freedom. And the best revenge isn't burning it all down. It's becoming everything they swore you'd never be. Let's start from the beginning. Before I go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. I share these stories because I know someone out there needs to hear them. If that someone is you today, this channel is for you. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and let's walk through this together. To understand what winning that money meant to me, you have to understand where I came from. I grew up in a mid-sized town in Central Florida, not the Disney World part, not the beautiful coast part, the forgotten middle part, where the strip malls are half empty and everybody knows everybody's business except nobody ever talks about the real things. I was the second of 4 children. My mother's name was Rebecca, my father, Howard, and from the very first moment I can remember having awareness of myself in a room full of people, I understood something that no child should ever have to understand. I was not the favorite. That title belonged to my older sister, Megan. Megan was golden, blonde, sharp-tongued in a way that adults found charming, effortlessly good at school. The kind of girl who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of it. My parents didn't just love Megan, they orbited her. Their whole emotional world bent toward her like sunflowers turning to light. And then there was me, Katie, the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who remembered to take the trash out, who made sure the younger ones, my brother Elijah and my baby sister Nikki, got to their school buses on time while Mom slept in and Dad was already out the door for work. Elijah was 2 years younger than me. He was sweet, artistic, always had his nose in a sketchbook, but he struggled, socially, academically, and the family spent enormous emotional energy worrying about him, rallying around him, protecting him, which I understood. I loved Elijah. Nikki was the baby, 6 years younger than me. She was spoiled in the way youngest children often are, not maliciously, just indulged. Whatever Nikki wanted, Nikki got, and Nikki knew it. But Katie? Katie just managed. Katie handled things. Katie didn't need much because Katie never asked for much. And I think that was my first mistake in life, learning too early how to need nothing from anyone. My best friend growing up was a girl named Raven. We met in 5th grade when she accidentally spilled her chocolate milk on my sneakers, and instead of apologizing, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Those sneakers were already kind of ugly, so I think I might have actually helped you." I burst out laughing. We were inseparable after that. Raven was the kind of friend who told you the truth even when it stung. She saw my family clearly, maybe more clearly than I did. She used to say, "Katie, your family treats you like the free labor fairy. You show up, you fix everything, and then they act surprised when you disappear." I used to brush it off. I was loyal. That's what I told myself. Being reliable wasn't being used, it was being needed. and being needed felt close enough to being loved when you didn't know the difference. I carried that confusion into adulthood. I worked hard. I got a degree in accounting, put myself through community college with 2 jobs and a scholarship I applied for 17 times before I got it. I built a modest but stable life for myself in Tampa, a small apartment, a good job at a mid-sized financial firm, a routine that made me feel safe and in control. I didn't have a lot, but what I had was mine, and nobody could take it. By the time I was 34, I was the person in the family that people called when things went wrong, not to ask how I was doing, to ask what I could do. 8. Katie, can you help me with rent this month? That was Tyler, my cousin, for the 3rd month running. Katie, I need you to co-sign on something, it'll only be for 6 months. That was Elijah, my own brother, asking me to risk my credit for a car he'd already crashed once before. Katie, Mom needs help and you're the responsible one, so... That was Megan, queen of the family, delegating the inconvenient tasks to the invisible sister. I had become, somewhere along the way, a utility, a resource, a phone number people dialed when they needed something fixed. And I was tired. I was so tired. But I kept showing up, because I didn't know yet what it would feel like to stop. It was a Tuesday, March. I had just left the grocery store after a mentally exhausting day at work, where my manager, a man named Alan, had taken credit for a quarterly report I had spent 3 weeks building from scratch. He'd stood up in the conference room and presented my numbers to his bosses and accepted their applause while I sat in the 3rd row watching. I drove to the Dollar General near my apartment to pick up laundry detergent and a pack of batteries. I was standing in the checkout line when something made me look at the lottery display on the counter. I don't play the lottery, not really. Maybe twice a year I'll buy a scratch-off on impulse. But something that night made me reach for a Powerball ticket. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the performance review I'd been overlooked for. Maybe it was the text message I'd gotten from my cousin Tyler that afternoon. Not a hello or a how are you, but a straight shot. Hey, I know you're good with money stuff. I need like $600, can you help? I bought the ticket. I bought my detergent. I sat in my car and ate a sandwich I'd grabbed from the gas station because I genuinely couldn't be bothered to cook that night. I looked up the numbers at 10:47 p.m. And then I looked again because I thought I had made a mistake. I hadn't made a mistake. 6 numbers, all 6, every single one. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes without moving. Not screaming, not crying, not calling anyone. Just sitting there with the ticket between 2 fingers, the parking lot light buzzing above my car, and somewhere in the distance a group of teenagers laughing about something, completely unaware that 20 feet away, a woman had just had the ground drop out from under her entire understanding of what her life was supposed to look like. $5.3 million. After taxes, lump sum, just over $3.1 million. Let me tell you something nobody tells you about a moment like that. Your first instinct isn't joy, it's fear, a deep primal fear, because that much money, appearing that suddenly, doesn't feel like a gift at first, it feels like a target painted on your back. And I thought about my family. I thought about Megan, about how she'd find out, and how her face would rearrange itself into something warm and celebratory, and how she'd say, "Oh, Katie, we have to celebrate, this is so amazing," while quietly calculating what percentage of my fortune she felt entitled to. I thought about Tyler and the $600 text. I thought about Elijah and the cosign request. I thought about my mother, Rebecca, who had a complicated relationship with money, meaning she spent everyone else's freely and guarded her own with something that could only be described as religious devotion. I thought about my Aunt Liv, my mother's sister, who once borrowed $1,200 from me for a family emergency that turned out to be a cruise she wanted to take with her boyfriend, a man named Vincent, who nobody in the family particularly liked. And I thought, what if I don't tell them? Not forever, not as a punishment. Just not yet. Just long enough to find out what they're really made of. The thought felt dangerous and delicious at the same time, like opening a door you've been told your whole life to keep shut. I drove home. I put the ticket in a fireproof box I kept in my closet. I lay down on my bed without changing my clothes, and I stared at the ceiling for 3 hours. By morning, I had a plan. I want you to understand something before I tell you about what I did next. This wasn't about revenge, not at the start, it was about clarity. I had spent 34 years giving this family everything I had, my time, my money, my emotional labor, my presence at every crisis and celebration, and I genuinely did not know if they loved me or if they just loved having me available. I needed to know. Before the money changed the dynamic forever, before everyone's behavior became contaminated by what I had, I needed to see them without the dollar signs. So I created a scenario, a controlled test of loyalty. I would go to each person in my family, the ones I was closest to, the ones I had given the most to, and I would ask them for something small. Something I didn't actually need, but something that would be easy to give if they actually cared about me. Time, presence, $200. A board. A phone call. Nothing dramatic, just the ordinary everyday proof of love that most people take for granted. I started with my sister, Megan. I called her on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after I'd found out about the ticket, right after I'd quietly retained a financial advisor named Michael, who had helped me set up a blind trust and a quiet transfer of the winnings. Nobody knew, not even Raven. The money was safe and invisible. Megan, I said, keeping my voice tight and just slightly unsteady. I'm really struggling right now. My car needs a repair, it's about $400, and I'm really stretched this month. I hate asking, but I didn't know who else to call. There was a pause. And then Megan said, and I'm going to give you the exact words because I wrote them down the moment we hung up, because I knew I would need to remember them, she said. Oh, Katie, I'm so sorry. We're just really strapped right now. You know how it's been with the kids' activities. Have you tried one of those pay later apps? I think there's a good one. She recommended a payment app for her sister for $400. And then she asked if I had watched the latest season of a show she was into. She talked about that for 6 minutes. I know because I was timing it. I hung up and wrote 2 words in a notebook I had started keeping specifically for this experiment. Megan, failed. Next was my brother Elijah. Sweet Elijah with his sketchbooks and his complicated history, and the way he always made you feel guilty for being annoyed with him because he had struggled so much. I told him a variation of the same story, that I was really struggling, that my landlord had just raised my rent unexpectedly, that I needed $200 just to bridge the gap until my next paycheck. Elijah said, "Man, that's rough, Katie. I'm sorry. I literally just put all my extra money into a new drawing tablet I needed for a commission I'm working on. Hey, speaking of, do you think you could maybe lend me like $150? I'm waiting on a payment and I'm kind of short for groceries." I want you to absorb that. I called him asking for help. I hadn't even finished the sentence before it became a conversation about his needs. Elijah, failed. My cousin Tyler, the $600 text Tyler, was next. I didn't even try an emotional ask with Tyler. I called him and said I was in a bind and asked if I could borrow $300 just for 2 weeks. I'll pay you back with interest. Tyler said he was in between jobs. Fine. Okay, but then, within 48 hours, Tyler posted on Facebook about a trip he was taking to Orlando for the weekend with his friends, a concert and a hotel, that weekend. He had just told me he couldn't spare $300. Tyler, failed. Then there was my mother's sister, Aunt Liv, the one with the $1,200 cruise money. I drove to see her in person. I thought, maybe with someone seeing my face, seeing that I was struggling, it would be different. I sat at her kitchen table with her and her boyfriend Vincent, who, by the way, was wearing a brand new watch that I could see from across the table, and I told her I was scared, that I was falling behind, that I needed someone to just be there for me right now, and if she could help me cover a bill, I would pay her back as soon as I could. Aunt Liv patted my hand. She said, "Oh, sweetheart, you've always been so strong. You'll figure it out, you always do." And then Vincent offered to take us all out to dinner, his treat, because there was a new seafood place he wanted to try. I ate the dinner, I smiled, I drove home. I added to my notebook, Aunt Liv, failed. There were others. Let me move through them quickly because the pattern was the same and the hurt was the same, and I don't want to get lost in the repetition of it. My cousin Orlando, who I had helped move twice and picked up from the airport at 2 a.m. on 3 separate occasions, told me he was super slammed at work. When I asked if we could meet for coffee because I was going through something hard, we never got coffee, he never followed up. Orlando, failed. My neighbor and occasional family friend, a woman named Kate who had grown up knowing my family and who I considered a kind of extended kin, actually gave me a lecture about budgeting when I mentioned I was struggling financially. A 17-minute lecture, complete with a recommendation to download a spending tracker app. Kate, failed. My coworker and friend Andy, not family, but someone I had helped through a divorce the previous year, sitting with her on her bathroom floor at midnight when she couldn't stop crying, told me she was going through her own stuff right now and couldn't really talk. She posted vacation photos to Instagram 2 days later. Beach, umbrella drink, bright smile. Andy, failed. There were 2 people who didn't fail. The first was Raven. When I called Raven with my story, the car repair, the stretched budget, the fear, she didn't ask questions. She said, "How much and when do you need it?" I told her $400. She said, "I'll Venmo you right now," and she did. $400 at 9:17 p.m. with no expectation of getting it back, with a message that said, "Don't you dare apologize for asking." I cried after that call. Not because of the money, obviously. I cried because she was real. She was just real. In a sea of excuses and redirections and performative empathy, Raven had simply, quietly, immediately shown up. The second person was my younger cousin, a 22-year-old named Cole, who most of the family considered the difficult one, the black sheep, the one who didn't come to gatherings and had opinions nobody liked. Cole heard I was struggling through the family grapevine, not from me, and texted me out of nowhere. "Hey, I heard things are rough. I have $80 I can spare. I know it's not much. No pressure, just let me know." $80, that's what he had, and he offered it. Raven, passed. Cole, passed. 2 people, out of more than a dozen. 2. I have to stop here for just a second, because if you're feeling this story in your chest, if something about this is landing in a way that feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to know, you are not alone. So many of us have been the Katie in our families. The one who gives and somehow still ends up the last person anyone actually sees. If this story is speaking to you, please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. Every subscriber tells me that there's someone out there who understands, who's been through something real, who deserves to see their experience reflected back to them. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, and stay with me, because this story is about to turn, and I promise, the turning is worth it. For 8 months, I lived a double life. On the surface, to everyone who knew me, I was still Katie Shawn, the reliable one, the accountant with the modest Tampa apartment, and the secondhand furniture and the car that needed new tires. I still showed up to family events when I was expected. I still answered my phone. I still smiled at the right moments and deflected when people asked if everything was okay. But underneath that, quietly, steadily, I was building something. My financial advisor, Michael, connected me with a woman named Rebecca Chen, no relation to my mother, who was an estate attorney. Together, we spent the first 3 months making sure every decision was protected, structured, invisible. The money sat in a trust under a business entity I registered under an LLC name that had nothing to do with my personal identity. Nobody could find it. Nobody could claim it. Nobody could see it. And with that foundation locked in, I started making decisions I had been postponing my entire adult life. First, I bought a house. Not a flashy house, not the kind of house that announces itself. A 4-bedroom craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood in the Tampa Bay area with a wraparound porch and a backyard with 2 old oak trees and enough space that I could breathe. I paid for it in cash through the LLC, meaning it never appeared on my personal credit or public records in any obvious way. I hired a decorator, a young woman named Liv, which made me smile every time because it was the same name as my aunt who had sent me home with advice and a seafood dinner instead of help. And I gave her a simple brief, make it feel like safety, make it feel like mine. She did exactly that. I moved in on a Saturday in June. I slept on an air mattress the first night because the real bed wasn't arriving until Monday. And I lay there in the middle of that big empty house that was completely and entirely mine. No roommates, no shared walls, no anxiety about whether I could make rent. And for the first time in maybe my entire life, I felt like I could exhale all the way to the bottom. Second, I left my job, not dramatically. I gave proper notice. I was professional about it, because that's who I am, and that's who I intend to stay regardless of my circumstances. But I left. I left Alan and his presentation skills and his conference room applause and his habit of turning my work into his reputation. I left with grace and I did not look back. I took 6 weeks off, just for me, not productive vacation time, not working on side projects time, just time. I slept in, I read books, I cooked meals that took 2 hours because I had 2 hours to spend. I drove to the beach at 6 a.m. and sat on the sand and watched the sunrise and didn't take a single photo of it because I didn't need to prove it to anyone. I was there. That was enough. Third, I quietly set up 2 things that gave me something close to peace about the pain of those failed tests. I established a scholarship fund, anonymous, at my old community college. For women who were returning to school after difficult life circumstances, first-generation students, single mothers, women who were doing it alone the way I had done it alone. The fund would provide full tuition coverage for 3 recipients every year, indefinitely, funded through a structured portion of my trust that would sustain itself through conservative investments. Nobody would know it was from me. That wasn't the point. The point was that somewhere out there, a woman who felt invisible and overlooked and behind like I had, would get to go to school, would get to build something, would get that one chance that changes everything. I also set up a separate fund, much smaller, for emergency pet medical expenses, distributed through a local animal shelter, because I had a cat named Finn who had needed emergency surgery 2 years earlier that had cost me $1,800. I technically didn't have. I had put it on a credit card and eaten ramen for 2 months. I knew that experience. I wanted someone else not to have it. Finn, by the way, was now living his absolute best life in our new house. He had a window seat. He deserved it. Fourth, and this one took the most thought, I started quietly distancing. Not cruelly, not dramatically, not with the satisfaction of announcement. I just slowly withdrew my availability. I stopped answering texts about money within 5 minutes. I stopped auto-saying yes to every ask. When people called with problems, I listened, genuinely. But I stopped offering to fix it. Stopped sending money I didn't need to send. Stopped rearranging my schedule for people who wouldn't rearrange theirs for me. And you know what happened? Most of them didn't even notice. The calls spaced out, the texts became less frequent, and the ones that did still come were almost exclusively people checking in to see if I could do something, not asking how I was, not wondering if I was okay, just utilizing the resource. It confirmed everything the test had shown me. The silence was uncomfortable, but it was also clarifying, like cleaning a window you didn't realize was dirty until you see through it clearly for the first time. About 5 months into my silence, people started to notice the changes. Not the money, they still didn't know about that, but they noticed me. Or rather, they noticed the absence of the version of me they'd always counted on. The first person to say something was my sister Megan. Megan called me on a Sunday afternoon and I was sitting on my porch watching a thunderstorm roll in over the tree line, holding a mug of coffee and feeling genuinely content. When I answered, there was that familiar brightness in her voice, the practiced warmth, but underneath it, I could hear something tighter, something slightly off. I feel like I haven't heard from you in forever, Katie. Is everything okay? You seem distant. Distant, that word. I've just been busy, I said, which was true enough. Are you sure? Because Elijah mentioned he tried to reach you about something and you didn't respond, and I just want to make sure you're not going through anything. What she was really saying, and I knew this because I know Megan, was, why are you not available? Why have you stepped back from your function? I'm good, Megan, I said. How are the kids? She talked about her kids for 20 minutes. She never circled back to whether I was actually okay. My cousin Tyler was more direct. He sent me a text that said, "Hey, haven't heard from you. Also still kinda need that thing we talked about. You good?" That thing we talked about. The $600 he had asked for in a text that began with no greeting. I read it twice, typed, "I'm well, thanks for checking in," and didn't address the $600. He sent a follow-up 4 days later. I didn't respond to that one at all. The most interesting interaction was with my mother, Rebecca. My mother is a complicated figure in this story. I want to be careful here because she is my mother and I do believe, in her own way, she loves me. But love doesn't automatically mean understanding, and understanding doesn't automatically mean showing up. My mother showed love the way she had learned to show love, through comparison, through commentary, through the particular brand of maternal affection that includes sentences like, "You've always been so capable, I just don't worry about you the way I worry about your brother," as if my capability was an excuse not to pay attention. She called me in July. We talked for almost an hour. And at the end, after she'd told me about Megan's new furniture and Elijah's commission work and Nikki's boyfriend situation, she said, "You know, Katie, I've been thinking, you're 34. You're so smart with money. Have you thought about maybe helping your brother out a little more consistently? He's so talented, but he just struggles to stay organized financially, and you know how to do all that. I think it would be really good for him to have someone like you in his corner." Someone like me. In his corner. She was asking me to become her son's personal unpaid financial manager, voluntarily, out of loyalty to the family. I said, very calmly, "I think Elijah is capable of figuring it out. He's a grown man." The silence on the other end of that call lasted almost 4 full seconds. "Well," she said, "you seem tired." "I'm not tired, Mom," I said. "I'm just good." She didn't know what to do with that. Good wasn't a status that invited her intervention. Good was boring to a woman who had spent her whole life managing everyone's crises. We said goodbye. I hung up, and I sat with the realization that my mother had never once asked me what I wanted. Not my goals, not my dreams, not what I needed, just what I could contribute to the ecosystem of the family. I wrote in my notebook that night, "This is not personal. She cannot give what she never learned to give. That is the tragedy of it, not the cruelty." That was the night I stopped being angry and started being free. 8 months after I won the lottery, I sat Raven down in my new kitchen. She didn't know it was a new kitchen. I had told her I was house-sitting for a friend, a story she had only half believed because Raven has excellent instincts, and she had given me a look when I said it that clearly communicated she thought I was being evasive. I made us both tea. I sat across from her at my kitchen table, my oak table, that I had picked out myself, that was completely and irrevocably mine, and I slid the original lottery ticket across to her in a plastic sleeve. She looked at it. She looked up at me. She looked at it again. "Katie." "Yes." "Katie, what is this?" "You know what it is." She put the ticket down very carefully. She stood up. She paced to the window. She turned back around. Her eyes were bright and wet and wide. "How long?" 8 months. 8 months. She said it slowly. Then, is this your house? Yes. She covered her mouth. And then Raven, my most honest, clearest-eyed, tell you the truth even when it stings best friend, started crying. Not a little. Crying the way you cry when something you hoped was true about someone turns out to be absolutely, completely, provably real. When she could speak again, she said, "You tested them, didn't you? That whole thing, the car repair, the rent, that was you checking." Yes. She sat back down. She wrapped both hands around her mug of tea. She looked at me for a long time. "And you and Cole," I said. "That's it, out of everyone." She didn't look surprised. She looked sad, but not surprised. We sat there for a while without talking. That's the kind of friendship where the silence is full rather than empty, where you don't need to fill it with words because you're both already thinking the same thing. Finally, she said, "So what are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm already doing it." I did tell Raven about the trust, the house, the scholarship fund, Finn's window seat. I told her I had left my job and taken 6 weeks and driven to the beach at sunrise without photographing it. I told her about Michael and the estate attorney and the LLC. She listened to all of it. And then she said, "You became a different person." I thought about that. "No," I said eventually. "I became the person I was always supposed to be. I just finally had the space to." She raised her mug to me like a toast. "To the girl they underestimated," she said. To the girl they underestimated, I agreed. 9 months after I won the lottery, my family found out I had moved. I hadn't announced it. I hadn't held a housewarming. I had simply moved, and when the occasional person had asked why they couldn't reach me at my old apartment, I had said I was in transition, which technically was accurate. It was my Uncle Larson, my mother's brother, a loud, well-meaning man who occasionally said the exact wrong thing with complete sincerity, who figured out something was genuinely different. Larson ran into a mutual acquaintance who had seen me at the hardware store in a neighborhood that was considerably nicer than where I used to live. He called my mother. My mother called me. "Did you move?" "Yes." "Where?" I told her the neighborhood, not the address, just the area. A pause. That's a nice area, Katie." "It is." "How are you affording that?" And there it was, the question I had been waiting for. Not, "Are you happy there? Do you love it? Did you find a good home?" But immediately, reflexively, "How are you affording that?" "I've been making good decisions," I said. "I'm really happy, Mom." I let that sit. Happy. That was the information I was offering. Take it or leave it. She took a different angle. "Katie, if there's something you're not telling us, if something happened, we're your family, you can tell us." "We're your family." I almost laughed. I didn't. "I know," I said. "And when I have something to tell, you'll hear it from me directly. But right now, I'm just good. I'm really, genuinely good." She hung up slightly uneasily, and I could feel the machine start to turn, the family information network activating, people talking, speculation spreading. It was my cousin Christopher who pushed hardest for an answer. Christopher was 38, the oldest cousin, considered something of a family authority, the one who organized reunions, who sent group texts that everyone was supposed to respond to, who operated with a kind of self-appointed seniority that everyone had always just accepted. Christopher texted me a week after my mother's call. "Hey Katie, heard you moved. Also heard you left your job. Also you haven't been around much. People are worried. I think we need to talk." People are worried. Christopher speak for I am suspicious and I want information. I thought carefully about how to respond. I thought about the notebook, about Megan and the payment app, about Tyler and the Orlando concert, about Aunt Liv and Vincent's new watch. I typed, "I'm well, Christopher. Thank you for reaching out. I've made some life changes that are really positive and I'm in a good place. I'll connect with everyone when the time feels right. He responded within 2 minutes. What kind of life changes? Because you're kind of worrying people by being so secretive. I put my phone face down. I went outside and sat on my porch and watched my neighbor's dog run in circles through a sprinkler. I let Christopher's text sit unanswered until the next morning. When I did respond, I said, "I'm not being secretive, Christopher. I'm just living my life. I hope everyone is well." He didn't text back for 4 days. When he did, it was a group message to me, Megan and Elijah, that said, "I think we should have a family dinner. Everyone's been kind of scattered. Good for us to reconnect." A family dinner. Interesting strategy. I said I'd think about it. There was also Lee, a man who had dated Nikki briefly and then lingered in the extended family orbit the way those situations sometimes produce, who reached out to me directly via Instagram of all things, to tell me that the family was talking, and that he had heard some things and wanted to make sure I was on handling everything responsibly. Av expedio. A man I barely knew, who had been my younger sister's ex-boyfriend for 14 months, was reaching out to advise me to handle my life responsibly. I archived his message without responding. I went to the family dinner. I know, some of you are probably thinking, why give them that? Why walk into that room after everything you learned? Because I had something to say, and I had earned the right to say it in person. I dressed carefully, not to perform wealth, not in diamonds and designer labels. I wore a simple, clean outfit that was well cut and composed. I got my hair done the day before, not because I needed to impress them. Because I wanted to walk in feeling like exactly who I was, not apologetic, not braced for impact, not performing the role of Katie the Reliable. Just me, present and clear. The dinner was at my mother's house. Rebecca had cooked, actually cooked, which was something she did for significant occasions. Megan and her husband were there. Elijah came, sketchbook tucked under one arm out of habit. Nikki arrived late and immediately took the seat closest to Mom. Larson was there. Christopher, a few others. I walked in and the room got slightly quiet in that imperceptible way rooms do when the person people have been talking about arrives. I said my hellos. I hugged people who offered hugs. I sat down. The first part of the dinner was normal, or performing normal, passing dishes, comments about food, Nikki's new job, Larson's yard renovation, all the surface-level conversation that families use to avoid talking about what they're actually thinking. And then Christopher, with the quiet authority of someone who has decided tonight is the night, said, "So Katie, tell us what's going on with you. You've been kind of a mystery lately." Everyone looked at me. I put down my fork. I took a breath. I looked around the table, at my mother, at Megan, at Elijah with his kind but slightly distracted eyes, at Nikki checking her phone under the edge of the table, at Larson who actually looked genuinely curious rather than pointed. I said, "I've made some changes in my life, some big ones, and I want to share them with you. But first, I want to say something and I need everyone to hear it. I spent most of my adult life being the person in this family who showed up, who fixed things, who lent money and co-signed things and drove to airports and sat through problems, and I did that because I love this family and because that's who I was. But about a year ago, I had a moment where I needed to know if this family would show up for me, not for the big dramatic emergency, just for the small, ordinary, everyday kind of need. I need you to know that I tested that, and with 2 exceptions in this room, the answer was no. I'm not saying this to hurt anyone. I'm saying this because I think the truth matters. I think I matter. And for a long time, I wasn't sure the people around this table felt the same way. The silence that followed was total. Megan opened her mouth. I held up one hand, gently, not aggressively, and she closed it. I'm not looking for an argument or an apology tonight. I'm looking for honesty. I've given you mine. That's what I have. Now, to answer Christopher's question about what's going on with me. I picked up my fork again. I took a bite. I looked around the table. I'm doing really, really well, I said, and I smiled, a real one. I didn't announce the lottery at that dinner. Some of you may find that surprising, but here's why. The dinner wasn't about the money. The dinner was about me. About standing in that room as a full human being and saying, I see what happened. I deserve better. And I love myself enough now to say it out loud. The money was a separate conversation. One I would have, on my terms, in my time, with individuals rather than an audience. What I wanted that table to understand was simpler and more important than a dollar amount. I wanted them to understand that I was no longer available to be overlooked. I told my mother about the lottery 3 months later. Just her, privately, in her kitchen on a Saturday morning with coffee and no audience. She cried. She hugged me. She was genuinely happy for me. I believed that, in her bones, she was. And then, within about 11 minutes, she mentioned that Elijah could really use a boost right now, that Nikki had been having a hard time, that she herself had been thinking about the roof. I had anticipated this. I wasn't angry about it. I had accepted that this was who my mother was, a woman who expressed love partly through management, who couldn't separate the joy of my success from the question of what it could solve for the people she worried about most, which was not, historically, me. Mom, I said, I love you, and I am going to make choices about how I use my resources thoughtfully and on my own timeline. I am not going to make those decisions from a place of obligation or guilt. I hope you can respect that. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, and this was the most honest thing my mother had said to me in years. You've really changed, Katie. I really have, I said. I think you raised me to be capable of it. I just needed the space. She cried again after that. I held her hand. We drank our coffee. Megan found out through my mother. She called me the same day, and the performance of warmth in her voice was at a volume I had never quite heard before. She was so thrilled. She always knew I was destined for something incredible. She couldn't believe how wonderful this was. I listened to all of it. I was patient, and at the end, I said, I remember the payment app, Megan. A beat app. What? When I called you struggling, you recommended a payment app. Another beat. Katie, I didn't know. No, I agreed. You didn't. That's the whole point. I let the silence hold. I love you, I said finally. And I want to have a real relationship with you. Not one where I'm the backup plan or the resource, a real one. If you want that, I'm here for it, genuinely. She said she wanted that. Whether she meant it in the way I needed her to mean it. That was still being determined. It is still being determined. People are capable of growth. I genuinely believe that. But growth requires honesty as the starting condition, and for the first time, we had been honest with each other. That was a beginning, maybe. Elijah's conversation was the most tender. When I sat with him and told him what I had and what I had done and what I had learned, he was quiet for a long time. And then he said, I'm sorry I made it about me. When you called asking for help, I've been doing that my whole life with you, and I've always known it wasn't right, and I kept doing it anyway. I hugged him. Hard. Because Elijah's honesty in that moment was worth more to me than any amount of money. It was the thing I had been looking for. Not the $200, the seeing. I told him I was proud of his work. I looked at his portfolio on my phone for the first time, really looked, and I told him which pieces moved me and why. He glowed. Because Elijah needed to be seen too. We had that in common. I didn't give Elijah money that day. Not because I wouldn't, eventually, in appropriate ways. But because what he needed from me in that moment wasn't money. It was the same thing I had always needed from him. Just to be looked at, just to matter. Tyler, I have not spoken to at length. Tyler is still Tyler. Some people, when confronted with the evidence of who they have been, find the capacity to examine it. Tyler is not currently in that place, and that is okay. I do not need Tyler to become someone different to grant myself permission to be at peace. Cole, my 22-year-old cousin with the $80, I took out for dinner at a restaurant he had definitely never been to. We talked for 4 hours. He was bright and perceptive and funny and deeply lonely in the way that people who are labeled difficult by their families always are. I told him what I thought of him. I told him that $80 had told me everything I needed to know about who he was. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up and said, "Nobody's ever told me something like that." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry it took so long." We're close now, real close. It has been almost 2 years since I sat in that Dollar General parking lot with a gas station sandwich and 6 impossible numbers. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. Self-reliance is not loneliness. For a long time I confused the two. I thought that needing nothing from anyone was the same as being alone, which meant that the more I built walls and the more I stopped asking, the more isolated I was making myself. I thought that other people's care, even conditional care, was better than no care at all. I was wrong. Self-reliance, true self-reliance, the kind built on clarity and self-respect, is liberation. It is the difference between needing people and choosing them. When you know you can stand on your own, every relationship you keep is a relationship you're keeping by choice. You're there because you want to be. They're there because they want to be. Everything false falls away, and what remains is what's real. What's real in my life is small. Raven, Cole. My financial advisor Michael, who has become something like a trusted friend through the sheer intimacy of someone knowing your entire financial situation and still treating you with respect. A new job I started 8 months ago at a nonprofit that works on financial literacy programs. A job I chose because it mattered to me, not because I needed the income. Finn on his window seat. My porch and the thunderstorms that roll through Tampa Bay in the summer like the world clearing its throat. What's real is a scholarship fund that has now sent 5 women back to school. Women who don't know my name but are building something with the quiet assistance of a 34-year-old who was once invisible in her own family and decided that invisibility could be a superpower if you aimed it right. What's real is the dinner table, my table. The one in my house that is completely mine. Where I sit across from Raven on Thursday nights and we eat food I made and we talk about everything and nothing. And I think, this is it. This is the thing I was trying to build the whole time. This is what I won. Not the money. This. The hardest lesson, the one I keep returning to, is this. The people who showed me they couldn't love me without conditions didn't fail the test because they are bad people. They failed the test because they were who they always were. They were always operating from scarcity, from habit, from the patterns of a family that had never taught any of us that love could be unconditional. My parents didn't know how to love me without needing something from me because their parents hadn't taught them any other way. Megan redirected to her children's activities because that was the survival skill she had built to protect herself. Elijah made it about his needs because nobody had ever consistently made anything about his needs, so he learned to grab when the window opened. Understanding this doesn't excuse it. It doesn't mean I have to remain in the same positions. It doesn't mean I need to keep my doors open to the same patterns of relationship. But it means I can put down the anger, and I have. I put it down. I set it outside on the curb like a bag of things you've outgrown, and I walked back inside my house and closed the door. And it was quiet, and it was mine, and it was enough. It was more than enough. If you've stayed with me this long, I want to say something to you directly. I don't know your situation. I don't know if you're the Katie in your family or if you've been on the other side of that story and you're recognizing yourself in a way that's uncomfortable. I don't know if you're sitting in a parking lot somewhere right now, metaphorically or literally, holding something that feels too big to handle alone. But I want you to know this. The people who take you for granted are not evidence that you are not worth caring for. They are evidence of their own limitations. And your job, your only job, is to see the difference. You are not obligated to keep making yourself available to people who only show up when they need something from you. You are not selfish for deciding that your peace matters more than someone else's access to your resources. You are not cold for learning to save the warmth for the people who actually tend the fire. The best revenge, the only revenge that actually lasts, isn't watching them suffer. It isn't denying them. It isn't any grand gesture or announcement or triumphant moment. It is becoming so fully, completely, undeniably yourself, so rooted and clear and alive, that the version of you they underestimated becomes almost unrecognizable. That's what $5 million taught me: not to buy things, not to hold power over anyone, not to build a wall and stand behind it smiling. It taught me that I was worth protecting, that my love was worth rationing for the people who could actually hold it carefully. That the best version of my life was always on the other side of my own silence, waiting for me to get quiet enough to finally hear it. My name is Katie Shawn. I'm 34 years old. I live in Florida. And I am, for the first time, fully and completely free. If this story stayed with you, if something in it touched a place you recognize, if you heard yourself in any part of this, please don't leave without subscribing. Please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. Every single subscriber tells me that the stories I share are landing somewhere real, that someone out there needed to hear that their pain had a purpose, that the quiet strength in them has always been enough. If you are that person, I see you. I genuinely do. Hit subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a new story. And if you know someone going through something similar, someone who has been the reliable one, the overlooked one, the one who gives and wonders if anyone is keeping count, share this video with them. Because the best thing we can do for each other is simply say, I see you, you are not alone, and you are more than enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. From one overlooked person to another, the journey is worth it. I promise.